I never thought I'd be writing this, but after what happened last weekend, I need to get this off my chest because I'm still shaking with anger, disbelief, and honestly, a twisted sense of satisfaction. I'm 32 years old now, and for the past 15 years, I've been living my life completely separated from my biological family. I built myself from nothing, created a successful career, found love, made real friends who became my chosen family, and I was honestly okay with never looking back. But sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, does it? Sometimes it comes crawling back in the most unexpected and devastating ways. Let me start from the beginning because none of this will make sense otherwise. When I was 17, my parents kicked me out of the house, not because I was some delinquent or drug addict or criminal, not because I was pregnant or failing school. I was kicked out because I refused to give up my college fund to pay for my older brother's wedding. Yes, you read that right. My brother Marcus, who was 25 at the time, decided to marry his girlfriend of 8 months, and they wanted this massive, extravagant wedding that they absolutely could not afford. We're talking about a wedding that would cost upwards of $60,000, complete with a destination bachelor party, designer dress, open bar for 200 guests, the works. My parents, who had always favored Marcus, decided that family should help family, and since I had about $45,000 saved in my college fund from my grandmother's inheritance, birthday money I'd saved since I was a kid, and some bonds my grandfather left me, they decided that money should go to making Marcus's special day perfect. I said no. I said that money was for my education, that my grandmother specifically wanted it used for college, and that I had plans. I'd already been accepted to a good university with a partial scholarship, and that fund would cover the rest. I'd worked so hard for this. I had straight A's, I was in the honor society, I volunteered, I did everything right. But apparently none of that mattered as much as Marcus's picture-perfect wedding. When I refused, my father looked me dead in the eye and told me I had a choice to make: be a part of this family and contribute, or get out. I thought he was bluffing. He wasn't. My mother stood there silent as my father told me to pack my essentials. I had 2 hours. I remember laughing at first because it seemed so absurd, so cruel that it couldn't possibly be real. But then my mother finally spoke, and she said something I'll never forget. She said that I'd always been a selfish child, that I'd never appreciated what they'd done for me, and that if I couldn't do this one thing for my brother, then maybe I didn't deserve to be part of the family. I was 17 years old, a month away from my 18th birthday, and my parents were throwing me out like garbage. My little sister Emma, who was 14 at the time, was crying and begging them not to do this, but they sent her to her room. Marcus, he just stood there with his arms crossed, looking almost smug, like he'd won some competition I didn't even know we were having. I packed what I could fit in 2 duffel bags in my backpack: clothes, some books, my laptop, important documents I was smart enough to grab, and a few sentimental items. My father escorted me to the door like I was a criminal. As I left, I asked about my college fund, thinking that at least they couldn't take that from me. That's when my father informed me that since I was still a minor for another month, and since he was the custodian of the account, he had every right to use it as he saw fit. He'd already transferred it. The money my grandmother left specifically for MY education was gone, handed over to pay for flowers and a DJ and an open bar for people who probably wouldn't even remember the wedding in 5 years. I had nowhere to go. My friends' families were sympathetic, but no one could take in a whole extra person indefinitely. I ended up staying at a youth shelter for a few weeks until I turned 18. It was one of the hardest periods of my life. I finished high school while working 2 jobs, living in a tiny room at a boarding house with 3 other people, eating ramen and whatever free food I could get from my job at a cafe. My guidance counselor helped me defer my university acceptance and apply for additional financial aid and scholarships. It took me 3 years of working full-time, saving every penny, and going to community college part-time before I could finally afford to go to university. I had no safety net, no family to fall back on, no one to call when things got hard. But I did it. I got my degree in marketing and communications. I graduated with honors. I landed an entry-level job at a decent firm, worked my way up, switched companies strategically, and by the time I was 28, I was a senior marketing director at a major company making 6 figures. I bought my own condo. I met my partner, James, who is the kindest, most supportive person I've ever known. I built a life I was proud of, without a single cent or ounce of support from my biological family. During all those years, I had minimal contact with them. My sister Emma managed to stay in touch secretly at first, then more openly once she turned 18 and moved out for college. She was the only one who tried to maintain a relationship with me. She apologized constantly for not doing more when I was kicked out, but she was just a kid herself. I never blamed her. Through Emma, I knew the basics of what was happening with the family. Marcus got divorced 3 years after that expensive wedding, by the way. His ex-wife cheated on him with one of his groomsmen. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a bit of karmic satisfaction at that. My parents apparently went into debt helping pay for the wedding, even with my stolen college fund, and they spent years digging themselves out. Emma told me that our parents occasionally asked about me, usually around holidays, with this casual curiosity like I was a distant acquaintance rather than the daughter they'd thrown away. They never apologized, never reached out directly. Emma said they seemed to have rewritten history in their minds, convincing themselves that I'd been rebellious and difficult, and that they'd had no choice. I told Emma I had no interest in reconciliation unless they could acknowledge what they'd done and offer a real apology. That apology never came, so I never went back. I didn't go to family gatherings, I didn't send cards, I didn't call. I mourned the family I'd wanted and moved on with the family I'd chosen. Now let's fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I was at a professional conference in the city where I grew up, about 2 hours from where I currently live. I'd avoided going back there for years, but this was a major conference for my career, and I wasn't going to let my past dictate my professional opportunities. On the second day, during a lunch break, I decided to go to this little cafe I used to love as a teenager. It was a nostalgia thing, probably a mistake in retrospect, but I went anyway. I was sitting there with my coffee and laptop, reviewing notes for an afternoon panel I was participating in, when I heard someone say my name. Not my current name, but my childhood nickname that only people from high school would know. I looked up, and there was Jennifer Park, who had been friends with my family, particularly close with my mother. She was one of those neighborhood moms who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. She looked older, obviously, but I recognized her immediately, and the look on her face when she saw me was like she'd seen a ghost. She approached my table cautiously and asked if it was really me. I confirmed politely but without much warmth. I had no idea what she knew or what she'd been told about my departure from the family. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Your poor mother will be so relieved to know you're alive and well. She's been heartbroken all these years, not knowing where you were or if you were okay." I must have looked confused because she continued, her voice taking on this sympathetic, almost pitying tone. She told me that my whole family had been devastated when I ran away and cut off all contact. She said my mother had apparently spent years crying about her lost daughter who disappeared one night after a small argument, and how guilty my parents felt that they hadn't seen the signs that I was so unhappy. She mentioned that there had even been a Facebook page at one point, trying to find me, asking if anyone had information about my whereabouts. I sat there completely stunned. I very carefully asked her what exactly she'd been told about my departure, and that's when the full scope of my family's lies came spilling out. According to Jennifer, and apparently the entire community, I hadn't been kicked out. I had run away in a fit of teenage rebellion. I'd been going through a difficult phase, dating someone my parents disapproved of, getting into unspecified trouble, and after one argument, I'd packed a bag and disappeared in the middle of the night. My parents had apparently filed a missing persons report, which I knew was a lie because I would have been contacted. They'd told everyone they'd tried everything to find me, that they'd hired a private investigator, that they'd reached out to all my friends, but I'd simply vanished. As Jennifer talked, painting this picture of my worried, heartbroken family and my troubled, runaway teenage self, I felt this surge of rage so intense I had to grip my coffee cup to keep my hands from shaking. They'd lied. They'd completely rewritten history to make themselves the victims and me the troubled, ungrateful child. For 15 years, they'd been telling this story, letting people feel sorry for them, probably basking in the sympathy and attention. I very calmly told Jennifer that wasn't what happened. I told her I was kicked out a month before my 18th birthday because I refused to give my college fund to my brother for his wedding. I kept my voice level and factual. The look on her face went from sympathetic to shocked to uncomfortable in about 3 seconds. She stammered something about surely there must be some misunderstanding, and I could see she didn't want to believe that the family she'd known for years could do something like that. I didn't argue with her. I just said that I knew what had happened to me, that I'd lived it, and that I had no reason to lie. Then I politely excused myself and left. I was shaking the entire drive back to my hotel. I couldn't focus on the conference. All I could think about was the fact that my family had spent 15 years lying about me, destroying my reputation in our hometown, making themselves martyrs. I called Emma that night. I asked her if she knew about the lies our parents had been telling. There was a long silence on the phone, and then she admitted that yes, she knew. She'd known for years. She'd confronted our parents about it once when she was in college, and they'd gotten defensive and angry, insisting that their version was essentially true, that I'd abandoned the family, so what did it matter how they explained my absence to others? I asked Emma why she'd never told me, and she said she didn't want to hurt me. She knew I was happy, building a new life, and she thought telling me about the lies would just drag me back into the toxicity. Part of me understood her reasoning, but part of me was furious that I'd been left in the dark while my name was being dragged through the mud. Emma apologized profusely and told me that most of the extended family and old family friends believed our parents' version of events. At family gatherings, I was apparently the ghost in the room, the lost daughter, the cautionary tale about troubled teens. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all those people who thought I'd abandoned my family, who probably judged me, pitied my parents, and believed I was some messed up runaway. I thought about future professional connections I might have missed because someone from my hometown believed the lies. I thought about the simple injustice of it all. And the more I thought, the angrier I got. But anger wasn't enough. I wanted proof. I wanted everyone who'd believed their lies to know the truth. The next day, I skipped the rest of the conference and I started digging. I went to my old high school and managed to get in touch with my former guidance counselor, Mrs. Chen, who remarkably still worked there. She remembered me clearly and was thrilled to see how well I'd done. I explained the situation and asked if she had any records from that time. She couldn't give me official documents, but she confirmed that she had notes in my file about my sudden housing instability in the last month of my senior year, notes about helping me with emergency financial aid applications, and records of my home, address changing from my parents' house to the youth shelter. She was willing to write a statement confirming these facts if I needed it. I contacted the youth shelter where I'd stayed, which had closed down years ago, but I managed to track down the woman who'd run it. She was retired but remembered me. She still had some old records in storage and was able to confirm the dates I'd stayed there and the circumstances under which I'd arrived. Another statement, another piece of proof. I dug through my old files and found documents from that time. Lease agreements from that terrible boarding house, pay stubs from my jobs showing I was working 40 hours a week while finishing high school, bank statements showing the tiny amounts I was surviving on. I had my university deferral letter that mentioned financial hardship. I compiled everything into a folder, both physical and digital. Then I did something that maybe was petty, maybe was justified, I still don't know. I looked up that Facebook page Jennifer had mentioned, the one my parents had allegedly made to find me. It was archived but still visible. It was created about 6 months after I'd left and was full of posts from my mother about her missing daughter, how much she missed me, how she just wanted to know I was safe. There were sympathy comments from dozens of people, shares asking if anyone had seen me. It was an entire narrative of concerned, loving parents desperate to find their lost child. The thing is, I wasn't lost. I'd been working at a cafe in the same town for the first year after I left. I was visible, living my life, not hiding. If they'd actually wanted to find me, they could have. Emma knew where I was the whole time. This Facebook page wasn't about finding me. It was about maintaining their victim narrative. I screenshot everything from that page, every post, every comment, every share. Then I started looking at my parents' current social media. My mother's Facebook was full of the typical mom stuff, but every so often there'd be a post about missing me, about her daughter who she lost too young, who she hoped was out there somewhere living a good life. The comments were always supportive, telling her not to give up hope, saying I'd come back someday. It was nauseating. I spent a week planning. I'm good at my job because I'm strategic, because I think things through, and I approached this the same way I'd approach a major marketing campaign. I knew that if I just told people the truth, it would be my word against my parents. They'd been telling their lie for 15 years. It was established canon in the community. I needed to be smarter than that. I created a blog. I titled it The Truth About My Disappearance. I wrote out the entire story, exactly as it happened, with dates and details. I included scanned documents, photos of my old pay stubs, the statements from Mrs. Chen and the shelter director with their permission, my university deferral letter, everything. I included screenshots of my parents' social media posts about their missing daughter, and then proof that I'd been findable the entire time, including an old employee record from the cafe that showed I'd worked there for a year, right in town. I wrote about what it was like to be 17 and homeless. I wrote about the youth shelter, about going to school and pretending everything was fine while I didn't know where I'd sleep next week. I wrote about the shame, the fear, the absolute betrayal of having the people who were supposed to protect you throw you away over money. I didn't write it to be vindictive or cruel. I wrote it plainly, factually, but I didn't hide the emotional truth either. Then I did something calculated. I didn't post it publicly right away. First, I sent the link to my parents, to Marcus, and to about a dozen extended family members who I knew believed my parents' story. I sent a simple email that said, I understand you've been told a certain story about why I've been absent from the family for 15 years. I thought you should know the truth. I'll be making this public in 48 hours, but I wanted you to see it first. Then I waited. It took less than 6 hours for my phone to start ringing. My mother called first. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that started with outrage about how dare I lie about them like this, and ended with crying about how I was trying to destroy the family. my father sent a text message threatening legal action for defamation, which was almost funny considering truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Marcus, surprisingly, was the first one to reach out with something resembling accountability. He sent a long email admitting that yes, that's what had happened, and that he'd felt guilty about it for years. He said he'd been young and stupid and selfish, and he'd let our parents steamroll over what he knew was wrong because he'd wanted the wedding. He said he'd tried to convince himself over the years that it wasn't as bad as he remembered, but seeing it all laid out, he couldn't pretend anymore. He apologized and said he'd support me in whatever I decided to do. I didn't respond immediately because I honestly didn't know if I believed him or if this was damage control. My aunt, my mother's sister, called me directly. I answered that one. She said she'd always thought my parents' story didn't quite add up, especially since I'd been such a good kid, and she'd tried asking questions over the years but had been shut down. She believed me and said other family members would too. She also warned me that my parents were panicking and trying to call everyone to do damage control, claiming I was lying or mentally ill or seeking attention. The 48 hours felt like the longest of my life. Emma called me multiple times, worried about the fallout but also supportive. She'd always known the truth, and part of her was relieved it was finally coming out. James, my partner, was incredible, supporting whatever I decided while also making sure I was eating and sleeping and not just consumed by this. When the 48 hours were up, I posted the blog link on my personal social media, which wasn't connected to my hometown people at all really, just my current life. But I also sent it to a few key people from high school who I knew were connected to that community. I sent it to Jennifer Park with a note that said, "You seemed concerned about my mother's heartbreak. I thought you should know the full story." Then I watched it spread. It started slowly. A few shares, a few messages of support from old classmates who remembered me. Then it picked up momentum. People from my hometown started sharing it, discussing it. Some people defended my parents at first, insisting there must be more to the story, but others who'd known me chimed in, confirming that yes, I'd been a good kid, and yes, they remembered when I suddenly seemed to disappear senior year. Jennifer Park, to her credit, shared the blog with a public apology. She wrote that she'd had a conversation with me where I'd told her the truth, and that she'd since verified parts of my story with others. She apologized for never questioning the narrative she'd been fed, and said that this was a reminder not to make assumptions about people's lives. The post went more viral than I'd anticipated. Someone shared it to a Reddit forum about family estrangement, and it got picked up from there. Suddenly, thousands of people were reading my story, commenting their support, sharing their own experiences. A few local news blogs in my hometown even picked it up as a human interest story about family estrangement and false narratives. My parents' social media went dark. They deleted the old Facebook page about finding me. My mother locked down her profile. I heard through Emma that they were absolutely mortified, that people in their community were confronting them, that their friends were asking questions they couldn't comfortably answer. I received hundreds of messages. Most were supportive, from strangers and old acquaintances alike. Some were from people in my hometown saying they'd always been told I was a runaway and they were shocked to learn the truth. A few were nasty, accusing me of airing family business publicly or trying to hurt my aging parents, but those were in the minority. The most unexpected message came from Marcus's ex-wife, of all people. She reached out to say that she'd seen the blog and wanted me to know that during their marriage, Marcus had often talked about his regret over what happened with me. She said the guilt had been part of what drove him to some of his destructive behaviors that contributed to their divorce. She also said that when she'd met my parents, she'd always felt something was off about how they talked about their missing daughter, like they were performing grief rather than actually feeling it. Her message was oddly validating. About a week after I made the blog public, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my father. His voice sounded old or tired. He asked if we could meet in person to talk. I was immediately suspicious, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet him in a public place, a coffee shop, with James waiting nearby just in case things went south. My father looked old. I know 15 years had passed, but he seemed to have aged more than that. He sat down across from me, and for a long moment, he just stared at his coffee cup. Then he said, "You've really made a mess of things." I started to get up, thinking this was just going to be more blame, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish," he said. "You've made a mess of things, but it's a mess we created. It's a mess we've been building for 15 years. I sat back down, shocked, because I'd never heard my father admit to being wrong about anything in my entire life. He told me that when I'd first left, he'd convinced himself that he'd done the right thing, that I was being selfish and needed to learn about family loyalty. But as weeks turned into months and he saw how I was actually struggling, actually homeless, actually working myself to the bone just to survive, he'd started to feel guilty. Instead of admitting the guilt and reaching out to make amends, he doubled down. He'd started telling people I'd run away, reframing the narrative so that he could be the victim instead of the villain. My mother had gone along with it, he said, because she'd felt guilty too, and the lie was easier than facing what they'd done. The Facebook page, the public posts, all of it had been a way to convince themselves and others that they were good parents who'd been wronged, rather than parents who'd failed their child. Over the years, the lie had become so established that they'd almost started to believe it themselves. They'd rewritten history in their own minds. He said that seeing the blog, seeing all the proof, having the community they'd lied to for years turn on them and demand answers, had shattered that comfortable delusion. He'd been forced to confront the reality of what they'd done. He said my mother was at home, too ashamed to face me, but that she knew they'd been wrong. He said he was sorry. He actually used those words, "I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. Part of me had wanted this apology for 15 years. Part of me had needed to hear a parent acknowledge the harm they'd caused. But now that it was happening, I just felt empty. I told him that I appreciated the apology, but that it didn't erase 15 years. It didn't give me back the stability I'd lost, the college experience I could have had, the family support that should have been there. He nodded and said he knew, that he didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted me to hear that he knew he'd been wrong. Then he said something that actually surprised me. He told me that the blog had caused a rift in his marriage, that he and my mother were in counseling because they couldn't agree on how to handle this. She wanted to try to salvage their reputation, to find a way to spin this, and he was tired of lying. He was tired of pretending. He said that maybe this public humiliation was what they deserved all along, and that if nothing else, at least the truth was out now. We talked for about an hour. It wasn't a warm, reconnecting conversation. It was honest and uncomfortable and painful. He asked about my life, and I gave him the basics. Good job, good partner, good life. I'd succeeded despite them, not because of them. He seemed genuinely proud, which was a weird feeling. At the end, he asked if there was any chance of rebuilding a relationship in the future. I told him honestly that I didn't know, that this was all very fresh, and that an apology was a start, but it wasn't a solution. He accepted that. As he was leaving, I asked him about the money, the college fund they'd stolen. He winced at the word stolen but didn't argue with it. He said it was long gone, spent on the wedding and then on paying off the debt the wedding had created. He said he couldn't give it back, but he wished he could. I told him I didn't need it anymore. I'd built my success without it, but that it would have been nice if he'd acknowledged that's what it was. Theft. He nodded and left. I met with my mother 2 weeks later. That meeting was harder. She cried a lot, apologized, but also tried to justify their actions in subtle ways, saying they'd thought they were teaching me about family, that they'd never imagined I'd actually struggle so much, that they'd expected me to come back after a few days and apologize. I pointed out that they'd taken my college fund, so clearly they hadn't expected me back. She didn't have a good answer for that. She also admitted that the lying had started as a way to save face with the neighbors, and then it had spiraled. She'd gotten so much sympathy and support as the mother of a runaway that it had almost become addictive, having people care about her pain. It was a disturbing admission. Marcus and I met for coffee as well. His apology seemed genuine, and he told me he'd actually been in therapy dealing with the guilt over what happened. He said he'd been a spoiled, entitled jerk who'd let our parents' favoritism go to his head, and that the consequences of that selfishness had haunted him. He offered to publicly corroborate my story if I needed it, though by that point, enough other people had verified it that it wasn't necessary. We didn't become close, but we reached a cautious truce. The fallout in my hometown was extensive. My parents apparently lost friendships over this. People felt manipulated and lied to. The community theater group my mother had been part of for years asked her to step down because there was too much drama and tension. My father's weekly poker game disbanded because half the guys didn't want to associate with him anymore. Their church community was split, with some people being forgiving and others being horrified by what they'd done. Some extended family members reached out to me with apologies for believing the lie and not questioning it more. Others sent messages defending my parents, saying I was cruel for exposing them publicly, that I should have handled it privately. I responded to the supportive messages and ignored the critical ones. I'd spent 15 years silent while they lied about me. I had no regrets about telling the truth. The blog eventually faded from viral status, as internet things do, but it remained up as a record. Every so often, I get a message from someone who's found it and relates to it, someone else who's been estranged from family and had lies told about them. It's become a weird kind of resource for people dealing with similar situations. Emma and I grew closer through all of this. She'd been caught in the middle for so long, and having the truth out in the open lifted a burden from her. She didn't have to keep secrets anymore, didn't have to navigate between her relationship with me and her relationship with our parents. She actually moved closer to where I live a few months after all this went down, saying she wanted to be near family that actually felt like family. As for my parents, we're in a strange place now. We have occasional contact, maybe once every few months, supervised, surface-level conversations. They've been doing therapy, both individual and couples, trying to work through why they did what they did and how to be better. I've been in therapy too, processing all of this. My therapist says that forgiveness is possible, but it's not required, and that whatever I decide about the relationship is valid. Some days I think maybe we can build something new from the ashes of what they destroyed. Other days I think the kindest thing for everyone is to just stay cordial but distant. The most healing thing, honestly, has been the validation. For 15 years, I'd known my truth, but I'd been alone in it. Having it acknowledged publicly, having people believe me, having proof that I wasn't crazy or lying or exaggerating, that was powerful. The revenge, if you want to call it that, wasn't even really about punishing my parents. It was about reclaiming my narrative. They'd stolen my story and rewritten it to suit their needs. I took it back. I did eventually run into Jennifer Park again, actually. I was back in my hometown for a work thing, and I stopped at the same cafe. She saw me and approached, apologizing again. She said that she'd been one of the people who'd given my mother so much sympathy over the years, and she felt like a fool for never questioning it. She said she'd learned a valuable lesson about not accepting people's narratives at face value, especially when the other party isn't there to defend themselves. I appreciated that she'd grown from it. The weirdest part of all of this has been the people who have come out of the woodwork with their own stories. Old family friends admitting they'd always thought something was off. Neighbors saying they'd seen me working at the cafe that year and had wondered why my parents were saying I was missing. Teachers from high school reaching out to say they'd noticed my sudden change in circumstances senior year but hadn't known how to help. It made me realize that the truth had been visible all along to people who'd chosen to look, but it's easier to believe a simple, dramatic story than to confront an uncomfortable reality. There have been unexpected professional benefits too, oddly enough. My story got enough traction that I was invited to speak on a panel about family estrangement and the narratives surrounding it. That led to some consulting work with a nonprofit that helps young people experiencing homelessness. I've been able to use my experience and my professional skills to actually help others in situations similar to what I went through. It's given the whole traumatic experience a purpose, which helps. James has been my rock through all of this. He came from a loving, supportive family, and watching all of this unfold was shocking to him. He couldn't imagine parents doing what mine did, but he never judged me or my choices in how I handled it. He just supported me, held me when I cried, celebrated with me when people believed my story, and reminded me of who I am when the negative comments got to me. We actually got engaged a few months after all this settled down. His family, who'd already embraced me, were even more protective and loving after learning what I'd been through. His mother actually cried and hugged me and said she was so proud of the person I'd become despite everything. It was the kind of maternal validation I'd never gotten from my own mother. The question I get asked most often, both by people who know the story and by internet strangers, is whether I regret going public. The answer is complicated. Do I regret exposing my parents and causing them public humiliation and social consequences? On a human level, there's a part of me that feels bad about causing anyone that much pain, even people who hurt me. But do I regret telling the truth, standing up for myself, and reclaiming my narrative? Absolutely not. They had 15 years to tell the truth, 15 years to apologize privately, 15 years to make amends. They chose to lie instead. I chose to correct the record. If that caused them discomfort, well, the truth often does. Some people think I should have been the bigger person, handled it privately, protected my parents' reputation despite what they did. To those people, I say that I was the bigger person for 15 years. I was the bigger person when I survived on my own at 17. I was the bigger person when I worked my way through college without support. I was the bigger person when I built a successful life and didn't badmouth them publicly. I was the bigger person when I quietly stayed away rather than confronting them. Being the bigger person is exhausting, and it's often just another way of asking victims to protect their abusers from consequences. I was done being the bigger person. I chose being the honest person instead. The other question I get is whether I've forgiven them. Forgiveness is complicated. I've let go of the constant anger I used to feel. I don't spend my days bitter about what they did anymore. I've built a good life and I'm happy, and their actions don't have power over my daily existence anymore. Is that forgiveness? Maybe. But I also haven't forgot. I don't trust them the way you're supposed to trust parents. I don't rely on them or expect anything from them. We're more like distant acquaintances who share DNA than a real family. Maybe that's its own form of forgiveness, accepting that they are who they are, flawed and capable of terrible choices, and choosing to keep them at a distance where they can't hurt me again. My little sister asked me once if I thought they'd really changed, or if they were just sorry they got caught. I told her honestly that I think it's both. I think they're sorry they got caught, sorry their lie was exposed, sorry they face social consequences. But I also think that being forced to confront the truth of what they did has genuinely made them examine themselves in ways they never did before. My father especially seems to have had a real reckoning with the kind of person he'd been. Whether that translates to lasting change or just temporary guilt remains to be seen. I'm not invested enough in the outcome to stick around and find out. There was one more confrontation that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's the one that honestly gave me the most satisfaction. About 3 months after the blog went viral, there was a family reunion on my mother's side. I wasn't planning to go, obviously, but Emma was going and she kept me updated. Apparently, my parents showed up expecting that things would be relatively normal, that family would politely ignore the elephant in the room like families often do. Instead, my aunt, the one who'd always suspected the truth, stood up during dinner and said that before they went any further, she wanted to address what had happened with me. She said that the family had been complicit in accepting lies without question, and that they owed it to themselves and to me to acknowledge the truth. She then asked my parents directly, in front of everyone, to tell the truth about what happened 15 years ago. Emma said the silence was deafening. My mother started crying and left the room. My father apparently sat there for a long moment, and then he admitted it. He told the whole family the true story, how they demanded I give up my college fund for Marcus's wedding, how they'd kicked me out when I refused, how they'd then lied about it for years to avoid judgment. Emma said some family members were shocked, some were angry, and a few admitted they'd suspected something like that but hadn't wanted to believe it. Marcus stood up and corroborated the story, apologizing to the family for his part in it. It was apparently a whole dramatic scene worthy of a movie. The family reunion basically imploded after that. Some people left early, disgusted. Others stayed and had intense conversations about family, truth, and accountability. My grandmother, my mother's mother, apparently told my mother that she was ashamed of her and that my late grandfather would have been too, which I heard was absolutely devastating for my mother to hear. The family has been fractured since then, with clear divides between people who think my parents should be forgiven and people who think their actions were unforgivable. Emma recorded my father's confession on her phone and sent it to me. I didn't ask her to, but she thought I might want it. Watching it was surreal. Seeing my father stand in front of his whole extended family and admit what he'd done, seeing the shame on his face, hearing him say the words out loud in a room full of people who'd believed the lie, it was validating in a way I hadn't expected. It was the public accountability I hadn't even known I needed. I saved the video, though I've only watched it a couple of times. It's not something I need to see repeatedly. It's just proof, a record, evidence that the truth came out and was acknowledged. Sometimes I worry that I'm too focused on proof, too concerned with documentation and evidence, but my therapist says it makes sense given that my reality was denied and rewritten for so long. Having proof feels like insurance against future gaslighting. Life has mostly returned to normal now, or at least to a new normal. I'm still successful in my career, still happy with James, still building the life I want. The difference is that now, the shadow of my family's lies doesn't hang over me anymore. People who Google my name might find the blog, but they'll find the truth, not a missing person page or speculation about the troubled teen who ran away. I control my narrative now. I have complicated feelings about how this all turned out. Part of me is satisfied that the truth came out and that there were consequences for my family's lies. Part of me is sad that it came to this, that public exposure was necessary for basic acknowledgement of reality. Part of me grieves for the family I could have had, should have had, if my parents had been different people. And part of me is just tired, ready to fully move on and leave all of this in the past where it belongs. Emma and I talk about starting new family traditions, just the two of us plus James and her partner, creating the family experiences we didn't get growing up. We're planning a sibling trip next year, just something fun and lighthearted, making new memories that aren't tainted by our parents' choices. She's become one of my best friends, not just my sister, and I'm grateful that our relationship survived and even thrived despite everything. As for Marcus, we have a cordial relationship now. We're not close, probably never will be, but there's no active hostility anymore. He's apparently engaged again, to someone who seems much better for him than his first wife, and he's been doing a lot of work on himself. He asked if I'd come to his wedding when it happens, and I said maybe, we'll see. I'm not ready to play happy family, but I'm also not interested in holding grudges forever. Indifference might be the best I can offer, and he seems to accept that. My parents keep trying in small ways. Birthday cards, the occasional email, invitations to meet for coffee. I respond sometimes and ignore other times, depending on my emotional bandwidth. They're in therapy, they're working on themselves, they're trying to be better. Good for them, genuinely. But their growth and healing isn't my responsibility, and I'm not obligated to be part of their redemption arc. If they become better people, great. If not, it doesn't affect my life anymore. The The most unexpected outcome of all of this has been the connections I've made with other people who have gone through similar situations. My blog led to a whole network of people who have been estranged from families, who have had lies told about them, who have had to build lives from nothing. We have an online support group now, and it's been incredibly healing to be part of a community that just gets it. People who understand that family isn't always safe, that sometimes leaving is the healthiest option, and that you're not a bad person for choosing yourself. I've also heard from people who were on the other side of the equation, parents who'd made mistakes with their kids and were trying to make amends. Some of them said my blog helped them understand the long-term impact of their choices. A few said it motivated them to stop making excuses and actually apologize to their estranged children. Those messages were difficult to read, but also meaningful. If my painful experience could help someone else avoid repeating those patterns, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Someone asked me recently if I would change anything if I could go back. Would I give them the money to avoid being kicked out? Would I handle the blog differently? Would I have tried harder to reconcile earlier? The answer is no to all of it. Being kicked out at 17 was traumatic and horrible, and it shaped me in ways both good and bad. But it also taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive things I never imagined I'd have to face. It taught me that I didn't need them, which was a painful but liberating lesson, and it eventually led me to build a life that was truly mine, not something dictated by their expectations or conditional on their approval. As for the blog, I stand by that decision completely. The truth deserved to be told. I deserved to have my story heard, and my parents deserved to face consequences for their lies. Would it have been more comfortable for everyone if I'd kept quiet? Absolutely. But I wasn't put on this earth to make other people comfortable at the expense of my own truth. I think about my 17-year-old self sometimes, that scared kid with 2 duffel bags and no idea what came next. I wish I could go back and tell her that it would be okay, that she'd not only survive but thrive, that the family who rejected her wasn't worth the grief she'd feel over losing them, that she'd find better people, build a better life, and eventually get to tell her truth and be believed. I think she'd be proud of who I became. I know I'm proud of her for surviving. The last conversation I had with my mother, she asked me what it would take for me to truly forgive them and be a family again. I told her honestly that I didn't know if that was possible. The family we were doesn't exist anymore. They destroyed it when they kicked me out and then lied about it for 15 years. If we were going to build something new, it would have to be from the ground up, with consistent honesty, real accountability, and a lot of time. And even then, it would never be what it could have been. She asked if I could at least try. I said I was trying, but that trying didn't mean forgetting or pretending or rusting them with anything important. It just meant I was willing to have occasional supervised contact and see what happened. She wasn't happy with that answer, but it's the only honest one I have. I'm not interested in performing reconciliation for other people's comfort. I'm not interested in giving them the absolution they want so they can feel better about themselves. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to be real, and real means accepting that they broke something that might never be fully repaired. I'm writing this now almost a year after the blog went viral, sitting in the home I bought with my own money, next to the partner who chose me freely and loves me unconditionally, in a life I built from absolutely nothing. My family told everyone I abandoned them, but the truth is they abandoned me first. They abandoned me when they chose money over their child. They abandoned me when they kicked me out. They abandoned me when they lied about what happened. I didn't abandon anyone. I survived. And then I thrived, and then, finally, I told the truth. If that makes me the villain in their story, I can live with that. Because in my story, the one that actually matters, I'm the hero. I'm the 17-year-old who refused to give up on her future. I'm the young adult who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college. I'm the professional who built a successful career from scratch. I'm the person who stood up and said, no, this is what actually happened, when it would have been easier to stay silent. I'm the survivor who became a thriver. And maybe that's the real revenge, if revenge is even the right word. Not the public exposure, not the consequences they faced, but simply this: I'm happy, I'm successful. I have love and friendship and a life full of meaning. I did it all without them. They thought throwing me away would teach me a lesson about family loyalty, but all it taught me was that I didn't need them, that I was capable and strong and worthy of good things, regardless of whether they recognized it. They lost a daughter who would have probably been there for them through everything, who would have been successful and generous and loving. Instead, they have a polite stranger who sends occasional emails and maybe shows up for major holidays if she feels like it. They threw away something precious because they took it for granted, and now they have to live with that loss. That's not revenge, that's just consequences. And I've finally made peace with the fact that those consequences aren't my responsibility to manage or mitigate. They made their choices, I made mine, and we all have to live with the results. So that's my story, The family who told everyone I abandoned them actually abandoned me first. I was kicked out at 17, built a life anyway, discovered their lies 15 years later, and decided the truth mattered more than their comfort. It's messy and complicated, and there's no clean resolution because real life isn't like that. But it's my truth, and I finally got to tell it on my own terms. And that, more than anything else, feels like closure.